Okay, one of the coolest things about Illustrator is the fact of how you can manipulate shapes with each other. And because it's vector-based, it retains a really clean, scalable format that is good for everything from creating something as clean as a small stamp to the billboard without losing any detail, unlike a bitmap material or bitmap file. So if I were to go in and create a shape, let's look at some of the ways that we can actually manipulate them. One, if I create a shape like this, and so I can do a few different things because these are stacked on top of each other. So just so you can kind of see what I mean before I start manipulating it, I'm going to make another shape like this. And with this shape, I can actually go in, change its color, and you'll notice that this is resting on top. It's literally acting as another piece that's actually just sitting on top. So if I look F7 for layers, we can see these are on the same layer. And the layer acts like a group. So I can have multiple layers and multiple objects on that group. So you can kind of imagine in an analogy that each layer is like a sandwich with different items like the bread, the meat, and whatever, and then I can choose how I want to put them in relationship to each other. Selecting something and using control, holding on control, or I believe it's command on the Apple, and then left bracket to move it backwards, and whoops, accidentally hit the wrong button. Left bracket to move it backwards, right bracket to move it forwards, or, oh jinkies, I keep hitting P. Or I can go to right click and go to arrange, and then we can see the shortcuts, as well as I can, if I have a stack of like 20, 30 things, I can bring it to front or bring it back, send backward one step, send backward for, send back all the way, send forward one step. So, this is really useful for basically having these shapes. And the reason I say this is because this is, it could mean the difference of having something like this where I didn't want a stroke, but I just wanted a shape on top of it, and then I can actually start to manipulate and have them laid on top of each other to create other things. Okay, so that's one thing to consider, and we see that they're both on the same layer here. So if I create a new layer and make new shapes, they're going to be hovering on top. And no matter what I do with the stacking on this layer, it cannot go on top of a layer on top of it unless I move the entire layer. So it's once again that sandwich analogy where I can move the lettuce and the meat and whatever I have inside of my sandwich that's all wrapped up, but that's irrelevant to the other sandwich that's wrapped up on top of it or underneath it. So the other thing is how do I edit a shape so that it's a little more interesting than just a circle? Well, there's a few different ways. So one way is, let me just take both of these. I'm going to copy and paste. Move these off to the side so I can have them for a rainy day. Spacebar, left mouse. Okay, so one of the most powerful things that I have inside of my tool set is called the Pathfinder. You'll see it right here. And if I can't find it, I go to Window, Pathfinder, or Shift Control F9, which I don't like using shortcuts that much that have 3 different or more shortcuts. It just starts to be a lot to remember when you have a whole bunch of different programs and each one with its different shortcuts. So I have these, and I want to think of combining them. So with the Pathfinder, you'll see these little options. If I put my cursor over it, you see it tells me what these are. So if I want to make this as, I want to unite them into one shape, now it's one shape. I'm going to Control Z. And that's really cool. So like, let's say, oh, you know what? I want to make a snowman. I'm just going to Alt left mouse button drag, and I'm going to shrink this down. This one's Shift Alt left mouse button. And I'm just going to duplicate that. Now, trying to outline this with the tools would be a bit of a pain, like the pen tool, to get it like this. And I don't have to, but I do want this as all one piece, so I could make a little snowman. And right now, that's not really working for me because I have um, all these little lines that are on top of each other. I mean, I suppose it could if I want to add dimension to it, but if I want this to be a very flat two-dimensional one, I could just say unite. And now it's all one piece. And then I can make another shape that would be his little hat and his little nose and little twiggy arms and all that kind of stuff. And then it's just a matter of going in and editing. Oops, jinkies. And it is just not, there we go. And it is just not wanting to respond properly. There we are. And there, my machine. I have a million things open, so it's taking a while. So now I can just quickly, set our little friend up, and maybe holding down Shift so it stays lined up and it's constrained to how it's moving. Now, they're not evenly spaced, but I can actually go to my Align tool, and then I can distribute them so that they're equidistant to each other. How nice is that? And then I could just make his little eyes and whatever it is I'm trying to make. See? And then just continue and illustrate him any way that I want. And if I wanted to make that him look a little more dimensional, that's where I could go in and use my pen tool. Choose something like a little bit of a bluish gray. Desaturate that a little, make it a little cooler. And then with that pen tool, I could just go in and start to add and then I just use my white, just move that to give him a little bit of a shadow, see? And then I could just duplicate this, pull it up here. And remember that little trick I showed you with the anchor point tool? And here's where I can actually just manipulate this stuff. See? If I just pull out, could see where we can just really start to edit this stuff and get a nice little illustration going on. So, and that's just with those shapes. So the Pathfinder allowed me to have that shape really fast, and I was really quick. I could keep going and give him a nice little shadow down here, and that's where we would go in and say, oh, a shadow is going to be more elliptical, and it's going to probably be, if I take the eyedropper and say it should be this color. But of course the problem is the shadow is in front of him, so Control left bracket, and then we put it behind him. And now we've got a nice little illustration just from that. Okay. And once we've got it and say, oh, I like the way that is, I'll just select our little snowman. And remember we talked about the groups. So if I created a brand new group, because I have him selected, he's on the blue group, that's why this little white dot is actually selected. So if I move that to the red dot, you notice he highlights red now. He's on the red group. So now, no matter what, if I move this over here, it's always going to be behind him because it's underneath the red group that he's on. And if I ever want to, oops, I don't want to accidentally grab him, I could just lock that layer and then build stuff behind him. I could also hide that layer. Okay. But the Pathfinder is really neat because I created that little guy from that. I can also take it and I can start to make different shapes and cut them away. So, in other words, I could use this and I could select these two and then go back to the Pathfinder and say, you know what, I want to minus what's in the front to give me this nice crescent shape. Or maybe I want to only leave where they're intersecting. We have this nice almond eye shape here. Or subtract where they are going for another sort of an interesting look, and then I could go to these separate pieces and then give them a different color entirely. See? And that's with the power of the Pathfinder. The Pathfinder allows me to do a lot of cool things, really just based off of what it is I'm trying to do. And you could see and mess around with these merging, trimming, all this kind of stuff. Another way is by cutting this guy, and that would be with the, let's see if we can find it. There's so many new tools inside of here, it's gotten kind of crazy. It's not in there. There's a little tool called the knife tool, and it is there you are right here. It's under what would be the eraser. There's the scissors, and then there's the knife tool. So why is the knife tool cool? Well, I'm going to select this shape, and now I'm going to go and oops, let's do it a little bit better than that. There we are. That's much better. Might see where we're going with this. So now it's still considered one full shape, but now if I let's say I'm gonna move this, I'm using the arrows, and now I can select a piece. Wow, that looks vaguely familiar. And then we could start to design our logo this way. And the cool part about this is that we can then go in and we can make all sorts of cool shapes that might look somewhat familiar, and you start to get the idea of how they generate these logos or make these logos. So if I were to go here, move you out of the way, And then once again, pick that knife tool. Let's do that a little bit cleaner. And now we're going to come in like this, comes in close, then comes out. And bam. And you start to get like other ones. Why this becomes important is when we start getting into text, we'll be able to cut text out of these shapes as well, and then layer text on top. But just some simple tools and ways of using the tools that you can play around with to kind of see what we can do.